Golden trumpets pierced the morning air, their triumphant melody echoing through every corner of the kingdom. From the highest tower of the billionaire king's palace, heralds proclaimed the joyous news that would set tongues wagging in every marketplace and cottage. Hear ye, hear ye. The beloved son of our great lord shall wed the fairest maiden from Willowbrook village. Let all prepare for celebration. In the cobblestone streets below, crowds gathered like moths to flame. Merchants paused their haggling, children stopped their games, and even the oldest grandmothers hobbled from their doorways to catch every precious word. The announcement spread like wildfire through the kingdom, carried by excited whispers, knowing nods, and envious glances. She'll wear silks finer than any queen, breathed one woman to her neighbor. Imagine, sighed another, rising from village dust to palace gold in a single day. Yet beneath the excitement, darker murmurs stirred. Some shook their heads knowingly, remembering the girl before her beauty caught the prince's eye. Others crossed themselves and whispered ancient warnings about hearts that change too quickly when fortune smiles. The wedding would be magnificent, but many wondered, would love triumph, or would gold prove the stronger master? Through the bustling market square, a weathered taxi rambled along the dusty path. Its driver was bent with age, his clothes patched and faded, his calloused hands gripping the worn steering wheel. Deep lines etched his face like road maps of a hard life lived in service to others. The bride-to-be sat in the back seat, her beauty undeniable despite the disdainful curl of her lip. Her silk dress rustled with each bump, and she held a perfumed handkerchief to her nose, wrinkling it at the mingled sense of honest sweat and simple soap that clung to the old man. "Here," she said coldly when they reached her destination, tossing a single copper coin onto the front seat without looking at him. "Try to buy yourself a bath." But her maidservant, a gentle girl with kind eyes, lingered as her mistress swept away. "Thank you for the safe journey, good sir," she said softly, pressing an additional silver piece into his weathered palm. "Your kindness in taking us was a blessing." The old driver studied both women with eyes that seemed to hold decades of wisdom. He pocketed both coins, but it was the maidservant's words that he treasured. Some gifts, he knew, were worth far more than their weight in precious metal. Within the marble halls of his magnificent palace, the billionaire king paced before towering windows that overlooked his vast domain. Golden sunlight streamed across priceless tapestries and gleaming floors, yet shadows of worry darkened his weathered face. "My trusted friend," he confided to his oldest advisor, "my heart grows heavy with each passing day. Does this maiden truly love my dear son, or does she merely hunger for the weight of our crown?" The advisor stroked his silver beard thoughtfully. "Love and ambition often wear similar masks, my lord. How can we know her true intentions?" The king's eyes gleamed with sudden inspiration. "Through testing, as the ancient stories teach us. If she cannot show kindness to the humblest among us, how can she be trusted with power over all? What do you propose, sire?" "I shall shed these royal robes and walk among my people as they do, unknown, unrecognized, with only my character to recommend me. If her heart is pure, she will treat a common man with dignity. If it is corrupt—" He let the words hang in the air like a sword. The advisor nodded gravely. "A wise test, though perhaps a dangerous one." "Truth is always dangerous," the king replied, "but it is also necessary." Under the silver veil of moonlight, the king stood before his mirror in his private chambers. With steady hands, he removed the golden circlet from his brow, setting it aside like a burden lifted. The rich purple robes followed, pooling on the marble floor in royal abandonment. From a hidden chest, he withdrew the clothes of a common workingman, rough spun cloth, patched in places, honest in their simplicity. As he donned each piece, he felt himself transforming from ruler to subject, from the powerful to the powerless. His closest servant, sworn to secrecy, watched with growing concern. "My lord, this deception troubles me. What if you are recognized?" The king smiled grimly as he rubbed dirt into his hands and face, aging himself with careful artistry. I have walked these streets for 40 years behind palace walls. Few have truly seen me. They see only my crown, my gold, my authority. Without these trappings, I am invisible." He practiced stooping his shoulders, shuffling his feet, lowering his gaze in the manner of those who serve rather than command. The transformation was complete when he looked once more in the mirror and saw not a king, but an old man whose only wealth was in his willingness to work. "Now," he whispered, "let us see what truth this masquerade reveals." Dawn painted the sky in gentle pastels as the disguised king positioned himself along the path the bride traveled daily. He had arranged for his regular driver to be mysteriously absent, leaving an old, battered cart as the only available transport. When the bride appeared with her maidservant, both women paused at the sight of the humble conveyance and its raggedly dressed driver. "Good morning, young ladies," the king said humbly, his voice carefully roughened. "I'm told you need passage to the village. My cart isn't much, but it's sturdy and the price is fair." The bride recoiled as if struck. "Ride in that filthy thing? With you?" She looked him up and down with undisguised disgust. "Your hands are black with dirt, your clothes reek, and I wouldn't trust such a decrepit vehicle with my jewelry box, let alone my person." She spun on her heel, calling over her shoulder, "Find us proper transportation, or we'll walk." But the maidservant lingered, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Please forgive my mistress, good sir. She's anxious about the wedding preparations. Thank you for your kind offer." As the bride stormed away, demanding someone fetch a suitable carriage immediately, the king watched with growing sadness. The first test was complete, and the results were deeply troubling. The marketplace buzzed with the constant hum of daily commerce. But today the usual chatter carried an edge of gossip that seemed to follow the bride-to-be wherever she went. Vendors leaned across their stalls to share whispered observations, and customers lingered longer than necessary to catch fragments of conversation. "Mark my words," croaked old Martha the baker, kneading her dough with unusual vigor. "That girl wasn't always so high and mighty. I remember when she'd help her grandmother carry heavy baskets, always with a smile and a kind word." "Aye," nodded Tom the blacksmith, pausing in his work. "But gold has a way of changing people, doesn't it? Makes them forget where they came from, who helped them along the way." Near the fountain, a cluster of women watched the bride examine silks with a critical eye. "See how she treats the merchants now," murmured one. "Like they're beneath her notice. And the way she speaks to that poor maidservant, sharp as winter wind." The bride's keen ears caught fragments of their conversation. Her cheeks burned with a mixture of shame and anger as she realized she'd become the subject of unflattering speculation. Instead of reflecting on their words, she lifted her chin higher, her resolve hardening like metal in a forge. "Let them whisper," she thought. "Soon they'll have to bow." In the privacy of her cousin's modest sitting room, away from prying eyes and listening ears, the bride finally allowed her carefully constructed mask to slip. She paced before the window like a caged lioness, her silk skirts rustling with each sharp turn. "Oh, Elena," she confided to her cousin, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If these simple fools only knew what I'm truly planning. They think I'm some village girl who's merely fortunate to catch a prince's eye." Elena set down her embroidery, studying her cousin's face with growing unease. "What do you mean?" The bride's eyes gleamed with ambition as fierce as flame. "Once I'm firmly established as his wife, once I've given him an heir to secure my position, I'll show him who truly has the sharper mind. He's gentle, easily led. It won't take long before he's dancing to whatever tune I choose to play." Unknown to both women, the disguised king had positioned himself near the window, his humble appearance making him invisible to their notice. Every word pierced his heart like a blade, confirming his worst fears about the woman his son intended to marry. "The crown will be mine in all but name," she continued, her smile cold and calculating. In the palace gardens, where roses bloomed in careful perfection and fountains sang their eternal songs, the prince walked with his father's trusted advisor. The young man's face glowed with the radiance of first love, seeing beauty where others saw cause for concern. "I know what the servants whisper," the prince said, pausing beside a marble bench carved with scenes of ancient love stories. "I know the merchants talk, but they don't see what I see when I look into her eyes." The advisor chose his words carefully, loyalty to both father and son weighing heavily on his heart. "Sometimes, young master, intense feelings can color our perceptions. Perhaps it would be wise to observe how she treats those who can offer her nothing in return." But the prince shook his head with the certainty of youth. "She's been hurt by poverty, by watching others live in comfort while she struggled. Her pride is just protection, a shield she's built around a tender heart. My love will heal those wounds, show her she need never fear want again." He gazed toward the village with the hopeful eyes of a man who believed love could transform anyone. "You'll see. Once we're married, once she feels truly secure in my affection, her natural kindness will bloom like flowers after rain." The advisor sighed, knowing that some lessons could only be learned through experience, no matter how painful. The disguised king waited patiently near the marketplace, having carefully orchestrated his second test. As the bride's carriage approached, he accidentally dropped his coin purse, allowing several copper pieces to scatter across the cobblestones in full view of her window. Immediately, he began searching frantically, his aged movements slow and desperate. "My savings," he muttered loudly enough to be heard. "3 days' work. How will I feed my family?" The bride's carriage came to a halt directly beside the scene. Through the window, she watched the old man's distress with amusement rather than compassion. When he crawled near her wheels, searching desperately for his last coin, she deliberately lifted her foot and ground her heel into the copper piece. "Clumsy old fool," she laughed, instructing her driver to move on. "Perhaps this will teach him to hold his money more carefully." But her maidservant had witnessed everything. After the carriage moved away, she quietly slipped back, helping the disguised king to his feet and pressing the crushed coin into his palm along with one of her own precious few. "I'm so sorry, sir," she whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Some people forget that we all struggle in this world." The king's heart broke a little more, both for his son's future and for humanity's capacity for both cruelty and kindness. That evening, in the sanctuary of his private chambers, the king sat heavily in his favorite chair. Not the golden throne that symbolized his power, but the simple wooden seat where he came to think and pray. The events of recent days weighed upon him like stones in his chest. He removed the rough clothes of his disguise and stared at them draped across his bed. These humble garments had shown him truths no royal finery could reveal. In them, he had witnessed the heart of the woman his beloved son intended to marry, and what he'd seen chilled him to the bone. "A heart of stone cannot be softened by silk," he murmured to himself, remembering an old proverb his own father had taught him long ago. Character revealed in darkness remains unchanged in light. Yet doubt gnawed at him. Was he being too harsh? Perhaps the girl was simply nervous, overwhelmed by her sudden change in fortune. Maybe his son was right. Love could indeed transform her. But then he remembered the crushed coin, the cruel laughter, the cold dismissal of human suffering. These were not the actions of someone temporarily confused by good fortune. These were the choices of someone whose true nature had been unveiled when she thought no one of importance was watching. Tomorrow would bring the final test, and with it, the truth that would either save or break his son's heart. In the elegant dressing chamber of the palace's guest quarters, morning light streamed through tall windows as the bride prepared for her final dress fitting. Seamstresses bustled about with pins and measuring tapes, adjusting the magnificent gown that would transform her into a princess. But as she stood before the great mirror, her attention was captured not by her own reflection, but by her maidservants. The humble girl was holding a spare veil, and the morning light caught her features in a way that revealed her natural beauty, the kind that needed no jewels or fine clothes to shine. The bride's jaw tightened as she noticed how the seamstresses smiled warmly at her servant, how their eyes lingered appreciatively on the girl's gentle features and graceful movements. Even in simple clothes, The maidservant possessed an inner radiance that no amount of gold could purchase. "You," the bride snapped suddenly, her voice sharp as breaking glass. "Stop preening in that mirror. You're here to serve, not to compete." The maidservant immediately lowered her eyes, setting down the veil with trembling hands. "Forgive me, my lady. I meant no offense." But forgiveness was far from the bride's thoughts. "If you think to outshine me on my wedding day," she hissed, "I'll see you ruined and cast out. Remember your place, or I'll make sure you have no place at all." As the bride left the dress fitting, her heart still burning with jealous fire, she encountered an ancient woman sitting beneath the marketplace's old oak tree. The elder's face was mapped with countless wrinkles, each line telling stories of wisdom earned through decades of observation. "Ah, the beautiful bride," the old woman said, her voice carrying the authority of one who had seen many seasons pass. "Come here, child. Let these old eyes look upon you properly." Reluctantly, the bride approached, curious despite herself about what this obviously poor peasant could want with her. The elder studied her with eyes that seemed to see beyond surface beauty. "You stand at the threshold of great fortune, young one. But remember this ancient truth. Treat even the lowliest with kindness, for you never know which stranger carries a blessing that will outlast all earthly gold." The bride's lip curled with disdain. Pretty words from someone who owns nothing but rags. What could you possibly know about ruling or fortune? "More than you might think," the elder replied quietly. "I've watched kingdoms rise and fall, seen proud hearts humbled and humble hearts lifted high. The universe has its own justice, child, and it favors those who show mercy." The bride laughed mockingly, her voice carrying across the marketplace. "Save your fairy tales for children, old woman. The only justice in this world is what we make with our own hands and wit." She swept away, leaving the elder shaking her head sadly. As twilight painted the palace walls in shades of rose and gold, the prince found himself walking the corridors with increasingly heavy steps. Tomorrow would bring his wedding day, the moment he had dreamed of for months. Yet a strange unease had settled in his chest like a stone. Earlier that afternoon, he had witnessed his beloved speaking harshly to a young servant who had accidentally spilled water near her feet. The girl had apologized profusely, but his bride's response had been swift and cruel, her words cutting deep enough to bring tears to the servant's eyes. "Perhaps she's simply nervous," he told himself, pausing before a portrait of his late mother. Wedding preparations can strain anyone's nerves, but the memory troubled him more than he cared to admit. His mother had always taught him that true nobility came not from birth or wealth, but from how one treated those who could offer nothing in return. "A person's character," she had often said, "is revealed not in how they behave before their superiors, but in how they treat their servants." He tried to push the doubts away, focusing instead on memories of his bride's beauty, her laughter when they walked in the gardens, the way she seemed to hang on his every word. Yet even these pleasant recollections felt somehow hollow now, like beautiful shells that might be empty inside. Tomorrow would bring answers, he hoped. Tomorrow would wash away these troubling shadows. The final humiliation came on the eve of the wedding, when the bride decided to demonstrate her complete authority over those she considered beneath her station. She had summoned the old taxi driver to the palace under the pretense of needing transportation for a final errand. The disguised king arrived promptly, his humble appearance unchanged, his manner respectful despite the growing weight of what he had witnessed. He stood before her in the palace courtyard, surrounded by marble and gold that seemed to mock his simple clothes. "You," she commanded imperiously, pointing at the ground before her feet. "Kneel down and polish my shoes. Consider it an honor. Tomorrow these feet will walk on carpets worth more than your miserable life." The disguised king's heart broke not for himself, but for his son, as he slowly lowered himself to the cold stones. With hands that had signed treaties and held the scepter of justice, he polished the shoes of the woman who would destroy his child's happiness. As he worked, she continued her verbal assault. "This is where you belong, old man, in the dirt, serving your betters. Look at you, groveling like a dog for scraps. When he finished, she spat on the ground beside him, her saliva landing inches from his weathered hands. Perhaps now you'll remember your place in this world. The king rose slowly, his heart heavy with the terrible knowledge of what tomorrow would bring. After the bride swept away in triumph, leaving the old man alone in the courtyard shadows, her maidservant appeared like an angel of mercy. She had witnessed the entire cruel display from a palace window, her gentle heart breaking at the sight of such unnecessary humiliation. "Oh, dear sir," she whispered, hurrying to his side with a basin of warm water and clean cloth. "Please, let me help you." She knelt beside him without hesitation, gently washing his hands where her mistress's spite had tried to stain them. Her touch was soft as a mother's, her manner reverent rather than pitying. "Forgive her, please," the maidservant said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "She knows not what cruelty she inflicts. Her heart has grown hard with fear and ambition, but surely it was not always so." The disguised king looked into her eyes and saw everything his son deserved in a wife: compassion. "You are kind beyond your station, gentle lady," he said softly. "In a world that often rewards cruelty, your goodness is like a candle in the darkness." She smiled through her tears. "We must be kind to one another, sir. It's all we have against the cold of this world." As she helped him to his feet, the king made his final decision. Tomorrow's revelation would be painful, but justice demanded truth. The wedding day dawned bright and glorious, as if heaven itself approved of the celebration about to unfold. The great palace hall had been transformed into a wonderland of golden light and ethereal beauty. Hundreds of candles flickered from crystal chandeliers, their warm glow dancing across silk tapestries and polished marble floors. Guests arrived in waves of splendor, nobles from distant kingdoms, wealthy merchants in their finest robes, dignitaries whose very presence honored the occasion. The air thrummed with excitement, filled with the melodious voices of a choir that sang of love and joy and new beginnings. Tables groaned under the weight of the finest delicacies from across the land. Roasted peacocks with their feathers restored in brilliant display, towers of crystallized fruits, goblets of wine that sparkled like liquid rubies. The scent of roses and jasmine perfumed the air, creating an atmosphere of almost magical beauty. When the bride made her entrance, a collective gasp of admiration rose from the assembled crowd. She was indeed magnificent, her gown flowing like captured starlight, her jewels catching the candlelight in brilliant flashes, her beauty so radiant it seemed to illuminate the very air around her. Yet as she walked down the aisle toward her waiting groom, her eyes were already calculating, already measuring the wealth that surrounded her, already planning how to claim it all as her own. The celebration was reaching its crescendo when the great doors of the hall suddenly swung open with a resonating boom that cut through the music and laughter like a blade. Every head turned toward the entrance. Every conversation died mid-sentence, as an unexpected figure appeared on the threshold. There, silhouetted against the torchlight of the corridor, stood the ragged old taxi driver. His patched clothes looked even more humble against the backdrop of silk and gold, his weathered face dark with the grime of honest labor. He stood there uncertainly, as if unsure of his welcome, his calloused hands twisting his worn cap nervously. A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the assembly like wind through wheat. Some guests laughed behind jeweled fans, others frowned at this breach of protocol. Palace guards stepped forward, hands moving instinctively toward their sword hilts, awaiting orders. "Who let this beggar in?" someone whispered loudly. "How did he pass the guards?" asked another. "Surely this is some mistake," a third voice added. The old man shuffled forward a few steps, his humble bearing making him seem even smaller in the vast, glittering space. His eyes searched the crowd until they found the bride, who stood frozen at the altar, her face a mask of growing horror and recognition. The wedding guests waited in tense silence, uncertain whether this was part of some elaborate entertainment or a genuine disruption to their perfect evening. The sight of the shabby intruder in her perfect wedding celebration ignited the bride's rage like oil poured on flames. Her beautiful face twisted with fury as she recognized the old man who had dared to disturb her moment of triumph. "Guards!" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a whip crack. "Throw this filth out immediately! How dare you soil my wedding with your presence?" She stormed down from the altar, her silk train rustling behind her like an angry serpent. Pointing a jeweled finger at the old man, she continued her verbal assault for all to hear. "You disgusting creature! This is a palace, not a garbage heap. Your very presence here is an insult to every noble person in this room." Her voice rose to a near scream, echoing off the marble walls. "Get out! Get out before I have you beaten for your insolence." The wedding guests shifted uncomfortably, shocked by the venom in her voice. Some began to murmur among themselves. This display of cruelty was far beyond what even the most nervous bride might be forgiven. Her maidservant stepped forward timidly, reaching out to touch her mistress's arm. "Please, my lady, perhaps." "Silence!" the bride snapped, shaking off the gentle hand. "Don't you dare defend this vagrant. He has no place among civilized people." The hall fell into an awful hush, waiting to see what would happen next. In the terrible silence that followed the bride's tirade, the old man slowly raised his head. When he spoke, his voice carried a quiet authority that seemed to fill every corner of the vast hall, reaching the ears of even the most distant guests. "Is this how you treat the poor and humble?" he asked, his tone gentle but somehow commanding. "Even on what should be your most joyful day? Is this the kindness that befits one who would be a princess?" The bride's fury only intensified at his audacity. "How dare you lecture me, you worthless old fool? I'll show kindness to those who deserve it, not to beggars who crash royal weddings." But something in the old man's voice, in the way he held himself despite his humble clothes, was beginning to capture the attention of the more perceptive guests. The king's advisor, standing near the front of the assembly, felt his breath catch in his throat as recognition dawned. "I have watched you these past weeks," the old man continued, his voice growing stronger, more familiar. "I have seen how you treat those you believe to be beneath you. I have witnessed your heart when you thought no one of importance was looking." The prince stepped forward from the altar, confusion and growing alarm written across his face. "Sir, I must ask you to." But his words died as the old man began to straighten his stooped shoulders, his weathered hands moving to the ragged collar of his shirt. "Tell me, my dear," he said directly to the bride, "do you not recognize me?" With deliberate slowness, the old man began to strip away the disguise that had hidden his true identity for weeks. The patched and grimy shirt fell to the marble floor, revealing beneath it the fine linen that royalty wore next to their skin. The false beard and carefully applied grime washed away at his touch, and suddenly his posture straightened with the natural bearing of one born to command. Gasps of recognition rippled through the assembly like a wave as the truth became undeniable. Palace guards who had been moving to eject him now stood frozen in shock. Noble guests who had laughed at the beggar's presence now stared in horror at their own blindness. The bride's face went white as bleached bone, her jeweled hands flying to her throat as if she couldn't breathe. Her knees began to buckle as the full magnitude of her situation crashed down upon her like an avalanche. "Father?" the prince whispered, his voice barely audible above the stunned murmurs of the crowd. Before them all stood the billionaire king in his full dignity, the man who controlled the fate of every person in that room, the ruler whose approval could elevate or whose displeasure could destroy. The same man the bride had humiliated, spat upon, and treated with contempt beyond measure. The transformation was complete, and with it came a silence so profound that the guttering of candles seemed as loud as thunder. Every eye in the hall was fixed upon the royal figure, waiting for the judgment that would surely follow. Standing tall in his revealed majesty, the king's voice rang clear and strong as he recounted every shameful detail of the bride's behavior to the stunned assembly. His words painted a picture of cruelty and greed that grew more damning with each carefully chosen phrase. "She threw her payment at me like scraps to a dog," he began, his gaze never leaving the bride's horrified face. "She refused to soil herself with the company of common folk. mocking their dirty hands and lowly station. The noble guests listened in growing shock as he continued. When I dropped my coins earned through honest labor, she crushed them beneath her heel and laughed at an old man's desperation. She commanded me to kneel and polish her shoes, then spat beside me as if I were less than human. With each revelation, the bride seemed to shrink smaller, her magnificent gown now looking like costume jewelry on a crumbling statue. The maidservant, standing nearby, wept silently for her mistress's exposure. But most damning of all, the king concluded, his voice heavy with disappointment. I heard her confess her true intentions, to manipulate my son like a puppet, to seize power through deception, to rule through cunning rather than love. The hall erupted in scandalized whispers. Some guests shook their heads in disgust. Others crossed themselves as if warding off evil. The bride's reputation lay in ruins, shattered beyond any hope of repair. The prince stood as still as a statue carved from marble, his face cycling through emotions like seasons through a year. Disbelief, horror, recognition, and finally, heartbreaking sorrow. The woman he had loved with the pure devotion of first romance was revealed as a stranger, her true nature as foreign to him as a different language. I loved you, he whispered, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed hall. The simple words held more pain than any scream could have conveyed. I loved you with everything I had to give. I defended you to everyone who questioned your heart. I believed in you when others saw only ambition. Tears began to track down his cheeks as he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. I thought your pride was protection, your coldness just fear. I told myself that love could heal whatever wounds had hardened your heart. But you never loved me at all, did you? You loved only what I could give you. Wealth, position, power over others. The bride tried to reach toward him, her voice breaking as she attempted to speak, but he stepped away from her outstretched hands. The most terrible part, he said, his eyes meeting hers with a sadness that seemed older than his years, is that I would have given you everything anyway. If you had just been honest, if you had shown kindness to others, I would have shared my throne willingly. But you wanted to steal what should have been freely given. The prince turned away, unable to look at her any longer. Desperation gave the bride strength as she threw herself at the king's feet, her magnificent wedding gown pooling around her like spilled wine. Her carefully arranged hair tumbled loose as she pressed her forehead to the cold marble, her voice rising in anguished supplication. Please, your majesty, I beg your forgiveness, she cried, her words tumbling over each other in frantic haste. I was foolish, confused by my sudden change in fortune. The poverty of my childhood made me hard. But I can change, I swear it. Her tears fell freely now, genuine terror replacing the artificial emotions she had worn like jewelry. I'll do anything to make amends. I'll serve in your kitchens, tend your gardens, give away every coin I possess to the poor. Just give me another chance to prove my worth. But even as she pleaded, the assembled guests could hear the calculation in her desperation. She spoke of serving others only now that her grand plan had crumbled, offered charity only when it might save her skin. Her promises rang hollow as empty bells, lacking the genuine repentance that might have moved hearts to mercy. The king looked down at her with a mixture of pity and sorrow. Your tears come too late, my dear. A snake may shed its skin, but its nature remains unchanged. You showed kindness only to those who could advance your position, cruelty to those who could not defend themselves. But I can learn, she insisted desperately. Love will teach me. Love, he replied sadly, cannot be learned from textbooks or royal decrees. As the bride continued her desperate pleas, the king's attention turned to the gentle figure who had been standing quietly nearby, her heart breaking for everyone involved in this tragic revelation. The maidservant had not tried to flee or hide, though she surely knew her association with the bride would bring her under scrutiny as well. Come forward, dear child, the king said gently, his voice warm with genuine affection that contrasted sharply with the cold judgment he had shown the bride. Trembling with uncertainty, the maidservant approached and curtsied deeply. Your Majesty, I know I have no right to speak, but please." "On the contrary," the king interrupted, raising his hand to stop her plea for her mistress. "You have earned the right to be heard in this hall more than anyone else present." He turned to address the assembled guests, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast room. "This young woman showed kindness when kindness was neither required nor rewarded. She offered respect to a humble old man when others offered only contempt. She washed the hands that her mistress sought to humiliate, and she did so with a grace that puts royalty to shame." The maidservant's eyes widened in shock as the king continued. "She alone, among all those who met me in my disguise, saw not my clothes or station but my humanity. She gave her own precious coins to help a stranger, asked forgiveness for cruelties she did not commit, and showed the true nobility that has nothing to do with birth or wealth." The assembly murmured their agreement, many nodding as they recognized the truth in his words. The king's final judgment rang through the hall with the weight of absolute authority and perfect justice. His voice was firm but not harsh, decisive but touched with the sadness of necessity. "Let this be known throughout the kingdom," he declared. "The woman who sought to marry my son through deception and cruelty is hereby banished from our lands. She shall leave with the clothes upon her back and nothing more, for she has proven herself unworthy of the trust we nearly placed in her." The bride's last desperate cries echoed through the hall as guards gently but firmly escorted her away, her dreams of power and wealth crumbling like sandcastles before the tide. But the king's attention had already turned to brighter matters. "As for this gentle soul," he said, taking the maidservant's trembling hand in his own, "she shall be welcomed into our family not as a servant, but as an honored daughter. Her kindness has earned her a place at our table, and her character has proven her worthy of the love and respect we reserve for our dearest relations." The prince, his broken heart already beginning to heal in the presence of such genuine goodness, stepped forward and bowed respectfully to the maidservant. In her gentle eyes, he saw the possibility of true love built on mutual respect and shared values. As the celebration resumed with a different but deeper joy, the king's final words echoed through the hall. "Remember this day, all who witness it. Gold may dazzle the eyes and power may command the body, but only kindness can truly crown the heart." Moral: true nobility comes not from wealth or position, but from how we treat those who can offer us nothing in return.